Welcome everyone viewing to the San Francisco Dance Film Festival. I'm Rachel Howard. I'm a dance critic for the San Francisco Chronicle and the Fjord Review. And I am humbled and delighted to be joined today by Robert Battle, who since 2011 has been the artistic director of Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, and Jamila Wignot, the director of the American Masters documentary Ailey, which you've just viewed, to discuss their perspectives on Alvin Ailey and this film. Thank you so much, Jamila and Robert, for being here to have this conversation today.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to start by saying that I just found this to be an ingeniously directed and tremendously moving film. And I'd like to start by asking about the beginning of its making, how it came together. This was 2018. The company was marking its 60th anniversary. Robert, I know you were talking with Rennie Harris at that point about making Lazarus and what kind of endeavor Lazarus would be, engaging with Alvin Ailey's life and legacy and his personal story. And then Jamila came in. She had been asked by the film company to make this documentary for American Masters. And you came to Robert and he said, the timing is good. Rennie Harris is making Lazarus, so you can film this at the same time that we go into the archives. Robert, this is a question for you. I'm wondering, what was it about how Jamila described her approach and what her aims would be for this documentary that made you feel like this was a good fit? You should go forth with this film.
Yes, thank you for that. And I echo too, it was just geniusly directed and conceived. And part of that trust was what you just mentioned. I mean, it was really, I presented the notion that I thought it was fortuitous that we were, that I commissioned this work by Rennie Harris, that he would be working on about the life of Alvin Ailey. And here we are, you know, with this opportunity of this film. And it was sort of her idea to sort of have that on a parallel track so that we weren't just only focused on the history, but also the living history of Alvin Ailey's legacy and the organization, the company. So I thought that was brilliant to kind of show in a way what he hoped would happen, you know, beyond his life. And there it is in real time in a creation that's happening in the studio about his life. I thought like that just really brought a whole different depth to the film. And so that made me know immediately that this was going to be really fabulous.
Wow. Jamila, anything you want to add? How did you describe to Robert what your aim was for engaging with Alvin Ailey's life as you approached the film?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we came to the company just, you know, Insignia Films, the production company, and myself all, first of all, being huge fans of the company's work. We all had a kind of different origin story around the company. Steve Ives' daughter had actually taken dance there and had also danced with Rennie Harris. So that was kind of an incredible moment of serendipity. I, like so many people, had just had a kind of the first time encounter of the Ailey company that had resonated with me. So I talked a lot about just the personal impact that seeing that very first performance had on me. But the thing about documentaries is you're kind of groping in the dark. And it's what I loved about being able to be in the rehearsal studio with Rennie Harris, was understanding that you kind of have like a little seed, but you don't actually know, you don't know what kind of flower it's going to bloom into. You go on this journey and it's a leap of faith. And I remember in the early days with Rennie Harris, him just, you know, I'd say like, well, how are you going to approach this? And what do you want to do? You know, he's just like, I'm going to find it out. I'm going to find my way. And we were doing the same thing. So I think it was really about a sense of wanting to do a film that explored Mr. Ailey as a man and really got at a kind of, you know, an honest portrait of all the things that he experienced, sort of the heights of and glory of everything he'd achieved, but also, you know, a real reflection upon, what that took and cost. And we were transparent about that in our pitch. And then, I think in some ways, the experience of working with Rennie, because we filmed that first, was a kind of proving ground for us. I think if Rennie had come back to the company and said, man, these people are getting in the way, or I think we were actually able to show our documentary practice and the kind of, the way we were going to be approaching the subject matter in that early part, which was part of the access building that is essential to documentaries. It's really, you want to tell a story, but the people who are kind of giving you their story have to feel trust and faith. And so I think we built that over time.
That's really interesting to hear, because I think the whole film is suffused with this feeling of intimacy with Alvin Ailey himself and with the people who are giving the interviews. That's really a quality that comes through the whole time. Robert, I'm wondering, I know that you grew up in Miami. You saw Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater when you were young, I think in high school. And then you came to New York and to Juilliard, and you would see Judith Jamison leading the company as you sort of passed by its building. I think you arrived in New York maybe around the time that Alvin Ailey died. So I'm wondering what that timing was like. And then I'm wondering, you knew that this was going to be intimately looking at both his life and his professional career, the legacy and the life behind the legacy. And I'm thinking, like, there must have been so much joy and excitement in getting to know him better through this process you knew was going to unfold, but also knowing that it was going to bring up painful things. Did you have any mixed feelings about that, about this bringing up the beautiful things and the painful things, and how deep you were going to go with that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right to mention I came here as a student at Juilliard in 1990. Alvin Ailey died in 1989, December. And that's not to say that I would have gotten to meet him before his death. I was just a student. I, though, did study in the summer when Ailey was in a different space, not their permanent home that we have now. And, if you were smart, you could kind of hang around until you got a sighting of Judith Jamison in the hallway. That was like thrilling. Because she is larger than life. I had only at that time seen videotapes, when I started dancing in Liberty City, of Judith Jamison, the legend, so that put me even closer to Alvin Ailey himself, and his essence, of course, was still walking the hall. So an incredible time in terms of knowing that this film would also bring up painful things, that he died of AIDS at a time when it was a double death, right? The stigma around it, and the death itself. All of those things I think were very important, because I often say that for me, sometimes for our heroes and sheroes that we put on pedestals, rightfully so, but we can lose the fact that it wasn't magic. Right? We use that term, and I understand the use of it. And some people do perform magic, but whatever, that's another story. But this took grit. This took a lot of work. This exposing himself in the way that he had to do to produce work to make visible some of the painful experiences that his people had in this country, or that he himself had. That takes a toll in and of itself. And so I think it's important for people, especially young people, to see that this just didn't just happen, right? That he had to work hard, that sometimes he had doubts. Sometimes, there were times when we didn't know if the company was going to survive, Those things are important to really celebrate the man, to celebrate that courage is not the absence of fear, it's the presence of fear, but going forward anyhow. That is the story that's being told. That's the full story. And I think it only elevates him even more when you know that he didn't have a big red cape, right? That he was a person like you and I to some degree, but with this extraordinary genius. And with that genius comes responsibility. With that genius comes a fragility that allows you to be able to channel all of that stuff to make visible for us to see. And that's what he did.
Thanks. This question is for Jamila. Jamila, the opening of the film is so brilliant, starting with that long clip of the Kennedy Center honors and really having the focus on this public life that he had to live out and the responsibility of that, in some ways, the burden of that. And then that sets up this thread that we follow through the whole film for the tension between him taking on the responsibility of that public life and still being a private person and the conflict that could create. How did you realize, when did you realize that that was going to be at the core of the film?
That kind of grappling between public and private was something that we always understood would be a part of it, because it was so evident once we had access to Mr. Ailey's archive, particularly the kind of distinction between the audio interviews he conducted in the last year of his life, which are really kind of the foundation for our film. We compare those to then the public interviews and how he is sort of presenting himself publicly. Although even in the public interviews, in the later ones particularly, there is a kind of sense of fatigue and weariness that's present. And so you're aware of that. And then a couple of the dance works really dealt with it. So early in the research, I was obsessed with this dance that I think Ailey too does, this dance quintet. And unfortunately, there's no archive of the dance. So with these kinds of films, you're always limited with what you can show. But quintet is this story almost like Dreamgirls a little bit. And it starts with these sort of glamorous figures in blonde wigs. It's actually a little kind of garish in the costuming, but each woman dances and strips herself down to reveal a kind of struggle that's at the center of it, and then retreats off stage, and on comes another woman. So you basically lift, it's a dance in which you're sort of seeing woman after woman lifting the veil on the personal anguish. Each has a distinct kind of experience. It's there. Flowers, which we feature a small clip of in the rehearsal studio, similarly looking at, on the face of it, Janis Joplin and kind of this celebrity, but really in that moment we have in the film where Mr. Ailey is saying, she's frustrated with all these things. He's talking about an artist's frustration. So I really saw him in that, that there's a way that he's working through something himself, and then he disguises it in these dancers. So we knew that that was going to be a part of it. The Kennedy Center kind of bookend that happens really came late in the film. We had I'm not a first sentence person. That's what I always say. So I sort of build films and then come back to the beginning and think about, okay, what did I build? And it just became interesting to see how we could return to this moment. We could encounter this moment that's a real celebration and a kind of extraordinary honor that only the highest artists, in the country achieve. And then we can return to it in the end and really understand a kind of deeper meaning about that moment. And so that's sort of what we were navigating. But really that opening with that was kind of a thing that we developed sort of in the last month of making the film. And it just felt right. And that's, again, my editor, Anuka Livia, and I are both similar in being kind of intuitive in our practice. I don't start out with like a clear sense, soup to nuts, but there's little themes or big themes in this case that I know a film has to wrestle with. And so the kind of how we're going to get there happens over time.
Wow, that's fascinating to hear. And I feel like the intuition in the process really paid off, because we get something that goes so much deeper than if you had been taking this kind of from on high documentary approach. I'm wanting to talk about that extraordinary recording, the other stroke of brilliance. Well, there's many in the film, but that you use towards the end, when it's the recording of Mr. Ailey himself, talking about his experiences when he began to unravel, lose his core, lose his footing, have a breakdown. And you use him in his own words. That recording was made for possibly a biography that would be written about him, or can you tell me more about the context of what that recording was made for? And Jamila, maybe you can talk first about how you discovered that recording and your reactions when you heard it?
So yeah, that recording are these audio only interviews he conducted in the last year of his life. So 88, you hear at the top of the film, you know, Alvin Ailey, 1988, January 1988. So it's 1988 to 1989. They were interviews done with a writer named A. Peter Bailey, who Mr. Ailey was working with to create an autobiography about his life. And the autobiography exists. So I knew from reading the autobiography that, oh, he had, you know, these conversations had taken place, but gratefully, you know, the Ailey company has those audio recordings in their archival collection. And so we were given access to those. And I mean, it was just, you know, felt like, okay, now we have access to him. And what's so special about them is that they are not, he's not in a moment of kind of pitching the company or, you know, promoting an upcoming season or we're here in your town. And they're very much about, they're an exercise in memory. So he's very much working to reflect upon his life. And there's just a kind of intimate quality to them that was really lovely. And of course, you know, also you really capture a sense of this poetic way that he spoke. So it's, you know, as an artist, I think he's always in some ways dramatizing. And so even in these, there's just like a real beauty, but I think that's his truth, you know? So when he talks about the way that the sun comes up in Texas or the kind of experience, these very detailed kind of sensual ways of discussing, you know, crashing through the bramble with his mother, he strapped to her hip. I mean, there's just a kind of vivid, but kind of very physical, sensual, open and alive to the world quality to the way that he's describing his life. So we just felt like, oh, this is the closest that we can be with him. And I think his willingness to wrestle with, you know, or to speak frankly about his mental health struggles is so wonderful, because here you see I don't think he's ashamed in this moment of a thing that I think as a society we impose. We are telling people to be ashamed of their experiences and who they are. And here he is, you know, diving in and really grappling with it and really trying to make sense of what are the tensions in his life that kind of arrived, that allowed him to arrive at a moment where he is at a breaking point. And, you know, that key way he describes it as, you know, coming from where I come from and then dancing on the Champs-Elysees, the distance between those 2 points, I think really gets at this kind of essential conflict for him of, you know, an imposter syndrome maybe, or just not being able to reconcile so many things about how do you understand that? How can you make sense of your ability to make success, that he traveled and achieved things that's, you know, his own family members and other people from the community he's come from haven't been able to. You feel so lucky and so fortunate, but you also don't know why. I think if you're a thinking person and a person with empathy, you don't know why you're the one that's so lucky to have been able to achieve those things. So there was just a kind of incredible closeness that we were able to get at with those recordings. And I am eternally grateful to the company for, you know, giving us access to them and also having the foresight to preserve them.
Yeah, and the way you use them too, I think was especially insightful, that you use the archival visual footage. First, you created it so that we felt like we were in Alvin Ailey's memory. You put us in his mind as he's speaking those words. And then you started running the footage backwards as he was unraveling, so that we're actually in his mental state, not seeing that from outside, but living it with him in a way in the film. I'm wondering, Robert, had you heard those recordings before? What was it like for you to hear them in the process of this film coming together? And what is it like for you when you're inside this experience that Jamila's created, where we're in a way inhabiting Alvin Ailey's actual experience by watching the film?
Yes, I mean, I had heard different parts of some of those recordings. Of course, I've read the biographies, that one, the one. by Jennifer Dunning, you know, so many times. So, you know, I have a different, but where I sit is very unique, right? I mean, I'm only the third artistic director, and I don't say that for biography, but I say that because I did not dance for Alvin Ailey. I did not know Alvin Ailey, the person, right? So any chance I get to hear his voice, the echo is even greater because here I am in the role as artistic director of the company that he founded, that he started. You know, I always say I'm very much about artifacts. You know, the most wonderful thing I love about the Museum of African American Culture and History are the artifacts. And I think about the desk that I sit at, that you saw in the film, was the last desk that he sat at before he died. And that desk used to kind of sit in the hall at the Ailey building. It was just kind of not in any particular office. And I said, oh, I'd like to put that in. And so I'm describing all this to say that I'm always hearing his voice in one way or another, and can understand some of the stresses, some of the incredible feats that one has to do, especially thinking about the time we're in now, leading the company during the pandemic. It's amazing that he was able to do what he did and make the space that he did, create the space that years after his death, you know, we're still riding on that crest of the wave, right? I mean, it's what Judith Jamison so profoundly says in that film when she says that when she was there with him when he died, he breathed in, but he didn't breathe out again. We are his breath out. And so when I'm listening to his voice, when we're in that film in that way, and I always tell Jamila, I'm always mad at her at the end because I cannot watch it without crying at the end. I try. I've seen it many more times than you have. And there's something so authentic about it. So not, I want to say Hollywood, but I'm using that as a metaphor for, you know, sort of over the top. There's something, like you said, so intimate that you can reach out and touch it. It's like a great singer with a voice that is so tangible that you not only hear it, you feel that you can touch it with your hands. And that's what I feel in those moments.
Yeah, I agree. When I hear Judith Jamison say that at the end of the film, it's she's so present with what she's saying. Intense.
Yes,
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. I'll just a couple more questions because I want to talk about some of the dances. Jamila, you brought up quintet, and it didn't make it into the film. And I'm sure there were so many in his rich archive that you wanted to get into the film and couldn't. But one that you got in that I thought was fascinating, and I desperately want to see it now, is Masakela Langage from 1969. It's right in the center of the film. I have not gotten to see it. I looked back and it looks like it was performed in 2008, 1998, in the 70s. I mean, I know the company also took it to tour. That was important to Alvin Ailey that the company performed it in Russia when they toured there. It's not seen that frequently. So it was amazing to see in the middle of the documentary. It's like 9 years after Revelations, all of this international success, and then being very impacted as he was by the death of a leader of the Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton, in his own home in a government raid. And this dance sort of probably coming out of that feeling. And those amazing moments at the end where he's saying again and again, "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen." I was really struck by Rennie Harris's interpretation of that. When he said it's like Alvin Ailey saying, "Yes, you came here to be entertained, but I have my truth to share." And I wonder if Jamila, if you could speak to this, and then Robert, do you agree with Rennie Harris's interpretation? And you know, what is the importance of that work in the Alvin Ailey repertoire? And I guess I'm putting in a plea also to, might you bring it back in the years to come? Jamila, you want to speak first?
Sure. I think I just want to start by saying, if I'm not wrong, it was in the 2018 season, because I
Oh,
remember, I think
Yes.
that it was brought, but
Yes.
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So but yes, bring it, can never, it should be as often seen as Revelations, I think, is this kind of powerful moment. So it is one of the most political dance works that Mr. Ailey made. I think most political because it's sort of head on dealing with things. I think we are now kind of reimagining what politics means. So I think the message of joy that's in Revelations and joy as a resistance is as political as Masekela Langage, but absolutely, seeing that dance work, being able, it was showcasing that dance was about all the archive we had to kind of build this moment. So knowing that, Miss Waters and Miss Jamison both talked about the film. We have Miss Waters talking about it and him sort of mentioning the death of Fred Hampton, and being able to see him in the rehearsal room working out the section of The Woman in Black with Donna Wood Sanders. But actually the dance was originally made for Judith Jamison, that Woman in Black section. And just understanding, nothing was off limits for him. And I think thinking about the kind of success the company had by 69, a kind of recognition they're having, and then questioning, it's so interesting to me because we are actively having these conversations today about, well, what does it mean to consume culture? And what does it mean if you can go to a theater and consume something so beautiful like Revelations and love those people and love that story and love those bodies on a stage? And then if you're not, a person of African descent, walk out of that theater and apply absolutely nothing to the people that are around you every day, that somehow you can love the culture, but you can still despise the people, frankly, or be okay with the fact that they're being mowed down in the streets in brutal ways, as Fred Hampton was. So I think, as Mr. Ailey himself says, I'm a Black man and I live with this, right? So to see that dance worked through is just very fascinating. And we wanted to allow for that because I think too often in the ways that sometimes Mr. Ailey was put into certain kinds of boxes, I think this idea of him as being a kind of political person and the kind of politics he was aligned with is not something that gets picked up by the press or people outside. I think that's something that everybody within the company is well aware of, but it's not the thing that gets sort of highlighted and celebrated. And so for him to interrogate his own audience in that moment just felt very profound. And then of course, Rennie is picking that up as well. So he has a much more, in Lazarus, it's a much more contemporary look at, and in a way, a kind of 21st century moment that he constructs in the dance that's looking at kind of protests and or a kind of mirroring of times. And I think, Rennie as an artist feels those tensions as well. It's like, when am I expected just to merely entertain and entertain you? And that is a kind of historical burden too of Black people that we, since the days of the plantation, are here to serve and entertain. And there are these moments where, that's kind of enough, we say no to that. And I think Masekela is one of those moments.
Yeah, Robert, I'm glad to hear that it was back in 2018. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to see it then. Can you talk about the importance to you of bringing it back?
Yeah, very important because, like I said, Alvin Ailey was, yes, he wanted to entertain, but also educate. The company was founded in 1958 on the cusp of the civil rights movement. So that, I think, speaks volumes to its purpose, its intent to disrupt, right? Even before we were using that kind of terminology, Black Lives Matter, Alvin Ailey was proving that through the works that he made, through the dancers that he cultivated, dances, that this was already a rally cry. And Masekela Langage, like a few of his ballets that really are confrontational, but also theatrical. Alvin Ailey had somewhat of a Broadway background, a background in straight theater. which is why I think that influenced the dances that he made, you know, from Jack Cole's, that jazz, you know, all of that articulation, but also telling the story, you know. Masekela Langlois is a perfect example of that, of why he called it the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. It's one of those works, and when it is being taught, you know, which I've gotten to sit and watch, of course, in rehearsal, you know, they talk about the things that Alvin would say about this person, or that the person at the end that's dead on the floor, you know. The tension that happens in this, you know, sort of beer house where they are, he has this wonderful way that you never really see what's going on the outside of that structure, right? But because of the tension he creates within, you get a sense that it's do or die on the outside, that you could walk out and be killed instantly. And that way of that theater that he creates in this proscenium stage, it's incredible. I don't think it gets enough notoriety in how he's able to manifest that kind of tension and even have humor within that. It's, I think, one of those works that, as you say, it needs to come back again and again. And now that we've had this conversation, it will.
All right, so one last question. I think it connects to the question that we were just talking about. Jamila, you also include in the film Bill T. Jones, which I think was just essential to have Bill T. Jones' voice in the film. And during one of his powerful interviews, he talks about the way that Alvin Ailey's work and the work of Black artists in general, that sometimes Black artists bear this burden that they're used by the culture at large to say, we are making progress. We're making progress on racism. And of course, here we are, so many years since the company's founding and the creation of Revelations in 1960, and we're still living through so many of the same issues of racism today. And yet at the same time, there's this moving interview with a dancer from the company in the film, talking about the power of Alvin Ailey and his work and how it just goes out there and it says, I am. Robert, I wondered if you could speak to what does it mean for you now, this idea of the company continuing on through all these moments of history and everything we've just lived through in the last 2 years. Do you feel that the company just continues to say, I am, and that that's one of the most powerful things it can do?
Absolutely. I think the most powerful thing that one can do is stand up and tell their story, or sit down or roll around or whatever it is that we do. But to tell our story, because that can liberate others, right? And I think Alvin Ailey wanted people to use his dances, but show themselves. I think that's the success of the company, is that you not only see an Ailey dancer perform, but you feel it. But I think that's in the bloodline of who he was as a human being and as an artist. And so this notion of I am, how simple, these simple sort of two words put together is everything, especially for the African-American community of people, of dancers who have had to constantly redefine the I am because they were told what they were or were not, you know, sort of inheriting this racism, this bigotry that attempted to say you were less than a human being. And so I am is huge. But I think more than that, the dancers understand, certainly I understand that I'm standing on shoulders. So I add to that, I am because he was, right? And so that liberates me, totally liberates me, so that anything is possible. And to me, that film captures that notion that I was always told as a little child, that I could be whatever I wanted to be. And so when you think about our heroes and heroes that we have, that couldn't be a better example of the possibilities.
Well, thank you both, Jamila and Robert, but I want to talk with you for hours more about all of your research on this film and all of the technical challenges of making it in a pandemic. I'm sure compounded what you had to do to achieve this amazing film. But I think we're out of time, so I'll just say thank you both so much for this conversation. And I want to say thank you to the viewers out there, and to remind viewers to tell your friends about the film Ailey. It will also be showing on PBS American Masters series next year. So look for it there as well. And tell your friends about the San Francisco Dance Film Festival, with 123 dance films from 25 countries continuing through October 24th. And to look up all the great offerings at sfdancefilmfest.org.
I just piggyback on one more thing, which is to say, and as much as I am thrilled that there was an archive that allowed me to restage Ailey's work for the cinema, nothing beats seeing it in person. So please, I'm doing the plug for Ailey. I mean, it's so wonderful to be back in theaters, to be with, you know, people experiencing the arts the way that we can. So also go see the Ailey American Dance Theater when they come to town. Robert,
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jamila, for doing my job. Thank you. I appreciate that. No,
Yeah.
she's right.
Absolutely, and especially to Bay Area viewers of the SF Dance Film Festival, we have been so blessed in the Bay Area for this relationship that Cal Performances has with Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, that they come every year with revelations, with the incredible Ailey repertory, but also with this brilliant new work, like the new work you premiered from Jamar Roberts recently. So definitely keep coming out to see the company live. They are truly living out that out breath, as Judith Jamison says so eloquently at the end of the film. Absolutely. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.